Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this our Black History Month session. And as you know, the session is entitled "An Audience with Patricia Green." So my name is Clive Saunders. As you may or may not know, I'm the chair of the Watford African Caribbean Association, and this is a part of our program of events marking Black History Month. You'll all be aware that Black History isn't just about 1 month. But it's symbolic tonight we're doing this. So the association, of course, is here to represent and promote the interests of people of African descent. And we have a range of activities that we organize in relation to that. And if you want to know more about that, then please get us in touch with us. Couple of other things I've mentioned before I pass on to our host. Sickle cell, you will know, we've been talking about with all of these sessions, and it's a disorder more predominantly of the African population, and there is a need in the UK for a lot more blood donors from our community. So please have a think and tell your families to consider donating. It could be a matter of life and death if you do that. I should also say that we are a charitable organization, and we do depend very much, particularly nowadays, on the contributions and donations that people do make. So if you have any spare funds that you'd like to donate, then please get us in touch with us. We would welcome that very much. During the evening, we'll talk about some of the other things that will be happening this evening. There is a program, we'll put a link to the Black History Month program in our chat. But from now, I'm going to hand you to the host for this evening, who's Marilyn Devonish, who is going to introduce our guest speaker this evening. So over to you, Marilyn.
Oh, thank you, Clive, and welcome to everyone. So what I'm very excited about this particular event. So before we get started, let me just tell you a little bit about Patricia, who will be with us today. So Patricia Evelyn Green Rogers, you're going to hear about some of the people she was mentored by. So one of them I'm particularly going to be wanting to hear about tonight. So Patricia was mentored by Dr. Dorothy Irene Height. If you don't know who she is yet, you will know shortly. Through her work with the National Council for Negro Women. Dr. Height was the longest serving national president of the organization, and she was among one of the civil rights leaders who practiced non-violent changes and having a collective voice. So one of the things I want to do today is take us back to some of those times and look at where part of this movement started. Patricia Green herself was National Director of a Juvenile Justice Program for Girls and served 2 terms as the president of the NCNW Pittsburgh chapter. Patricia learned as a 20-something-year-old that an interconnected global community could benefit from female-style leadership, and she was ready to help solve some of those critical issues, many of which still affect women and children today. So during this discussion, we're going to talk about maybe some of the similarities and differences that we have across the pond. I want to go back and do a bit of a retrospective in terms of some of the background and history and how we affect each other, how we can learn from each other. And there are also a few specific topics I want to touch on as well. So we will come to those. Now, in terms of your participation, please feel free to put any questions in the chat. If you did have something that you wanted to ask or contribute, then raise your hand and we can unmute your microphone. But we will get started first of all by welcoming Patricia. And Patricia, if you were to introduce yourself to people who have never met you before, what else would you like to add? What else would you like our audience to know?
Oh.
Just going to get you to unmute. There you go. You're unmuted now. Thank you.
I'm muted. Okay. I said that I strive to be a build bridger across differences.
A build bridger. Okay. So
I'm sorry. I build bridges across differences. And by that, I mean that, race is a social construct. It was pretty much packaged for all of the divisive reasons that we see now. And being raised in segregation, I wanted early in my life to get to know people who were different from people in my community. And once segregation ended and I attended graduate school that was predominantly white, that was my first opportunity to begin to connect with whites and figure out where the similarities were and find the common ground.
And so from your perspective, what would you say some of those similarities were, and where are we at now when you compare where you started to where the world is at today?
Well, where we are now, we are very fractured from this culture, a very fractured culture in general, and very much fueled by politics. And I want to say these are my opinions only. So if someone thinks differently, I welcome different points of view. And the political landscape has transformed a lot of people's behaviors here. And there were always, of course, for Blacks and other marginalized populations, there were always sets of social conditions that were unfair, that were not equitable. But now that you're seeing the eroding of some of the gains that were made through the political process, it's very saddening to see that take place. Now, I know because I am a baby boomer, so I was a product of segregation from first grade through 12th grade, my whole formative years. But I saw the sting of racism in terms of my own family. I also saw Brown versus the Board of Education that desegregated public schools. I saw major kinds of political games that transformed to equity that was heretofore not present for people like me. And it looks like we're turning the clock back, and that's very saddening. However, I'm very hopeful because we have a new generation of freedom fighters, I call them, and the likes of women like Latasha Brown, who's a very good friend, who are changing the way we look at even the political process. It's easy to think that our votes don't matter, but when we go out to the polls, we transform conditions because we win elections. And she has won some pivotal elections, she and some other friends in the state of Georgia, because of the relationships she has built with the populations who are most disenfranchised, who very often weren't voting because they felt hopeless. So I'm hopeful.
And it's interesting you should say that. Well, last week, the webinar that we did was about partly about the political process. So Clive, for example, is a magistrate. I talked about being what you'd call in the States an elected official. Here in the UK, it's a councillor. We had someone who was a school governor, and we were talking about the importance of actually getting involved in those processes to have a voice. Particularly, and I know particularly here politically, it really does feel like people often say, what is the point in voting? So can you take us back and tell us a little bit about Dr. Dorothy Height, because this was where people really started then to rally together, come together and start looking at the fact that collectively they could make changes. So I'd love to hear about some of that part of your history.
Okay, and I'll take it a little bit further back because I did my research for my master's in public relations on NCNW, the National Council of Negro Women. I did an image study to look at its history and how that history was reflected in the kinds of programs and action steps they had for Black women, their families, and communities. And NCNW was founded in 1935 by Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune. And Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune had access to the Roosevelt White House. She was very good friends with Eleanor Roosevelt. She also established a college, Bethune-Cookman College in Florida. And she had Council House, the organization, in an area where Council House was the only Black-owned property in that area. She was very much a mentor to Dr. Height and some of the other women who are very prominent in civil rights history. In 1935, as I may have mentioned, she founded it as an organization of organizations. That meant there were Black women from all sectors, all social stratas, and within that organization. I don't know if you've heard of Fannie Lou Hamer, freedom fighters. She was a member of that organization. So you could go from Mississippi sharecropper to women who were in illustrious positions, all under that umbrella organization. As I mentioned, she mentored Dr. Height, and Dr. Height had, at that time of meeting her, she was very much prominent in the YWCA. She was the most highest ranking Black person in the YWCA addressing issues of racial justice. And I met her through working for the National Council of Negro Women with the Juvenile Justice Program. I think I entered heaven when I met her and met all of the other Black women from all over the country who were making change in their communities under this single umbrella. The Black woman, her family, and community was the thrust of the organization, is the thrust because it's still in existence. So being a part of that as a 20-something-year-old and also running a juvenile justice program for girls who had been adjudicated delinquent. And at that time, girls, Black girls who were adjudicated delinquent were being put in jail or put in, detention for crimes, if you will, of getting pregnant, even if it were rape. And no one else was being treated that way, not even Black boys, in terms of incarceration. So with that in mind, this was a non-residential juvenile justice program where our NCNW members were their mentors, and they pretty much motivated them to get their lives together. And it was all done without having them behind bars. So it was a very, very successful program in terms of transforming conditions for Black girls and by extension, Black families. So when I left NCNW, I relocated to Pittsburgh. And in Pittsburgh, I was the president of the Pittsburgh section, as you mentioned earlier, for the National Council of Negro Women. And that meant that we addressed programs that benefited Black women, their families, and communities. And when I say this does not negate the role of Black men. But when you look at even pictures in civil rights history, you saw Dr. Haidt with Dr. King and all of the other civil rights legends of that time. She was the only woman there because it was still pretty much male dominated. So having Dr. Haidt and NCNW began to have a Black female voice, which was pivotal. I mentioned to you one of the programs that she had was Wednesdays in Mississippi. And this was a program to look at the civil rights unrest, the racial discrimination, the deaths of Black men at the hands of white racists. Well, Wednesdays in Mississippi was a time that Dr. Haidt would have discussion groups with Black women, and Polly Spiegel Cowan would have discussions with white women. And one was Black, one was white. The common theme was in the discussions was that these women were concerned about the lives their children would inherit, if you will, based on the way things were, the unrest, the civil unrest. And those kinds of, we call it now focus groups or listening sessions, were pivotal to getting the funds to create change within that state and other Southern states.
Wonderful, thank you. And I know that when we spoke also, you actually mentioned the start. Now you called it Negro Week, but you know, we talked about the beginnings of what is now for us Black History Month. I know yours is earlier in the year, in March, but tell us a little bit about where that Black History Week started and who started it and why.
Carter G. Woodson started Black History, Negro, we were called Negro then, Negro History Week. And a lot of this celebration of us, really, we are an oral culture, if you will. And Dr. Bethune did interviews with former slaves. So she was capturing slave narratives. This kind of documentation is very important because we were enslaved, but that did not mean that we did not have value. I mean, they brought some of the best Africans over here. And if you want to look at what we did coming from Richmond, the capital of the Confederacy, there are cobblestone streets in Richmond that no one had the craftsmanship to build like slaves did. And when you look at the buildings, a lot of the development, even in the nation's capital, came at the hands of slaves. I read somewhere that they couldn't even find other craftspersons that were non-Black to do what Blacks were able to do. They brought them over. They knew what their talents were when they brought them over. So this Negro History Week was really designed to celebrate our accomplishments, that we were more than what the textbooks were saying. We were more than what the white historians were saying about us. And Negro History Week became Black History Month. Negro History Week, I don't know if I told you, it was 1926 when it was established. So what you see here, you see some self-help. No one was legislating that we have a Negro History Week. We decided we would have it for the importance of celebrating our accomplishments as well as our struggles.
And I do see people both sides of the pond, but particularly here, I've seen it quite a lot. People saying, well, why are we bothering with that? It should be Black History Month every month. And you shouldn't be now picking out this particular race of people. Why don't we get a White History Month? And I've seen all those conversations. Now, for someone who knows the roots of that and why and how it was created, what are your thoughts when people say things like that there's no need for a Black History Month either in the US or the UK anymore?
Well, I would document all of the inequities. I would document, if you are a white person and you walk in the room, no one's going to label you. That if you're a Black person, even if you have a high status role professionally, even if you are basically a decent person, you will still be judged very often because you show up Black. So we need we need these kinds of things to remind us that we are not what we are called or who we are called. But whites need to know also, they need to have a point of knowledge, because we have these things called mind bugs, and they begin really as children, where things are put in our heads about other people that form the unconscious and conscious bias. So if you're celebrating the accomplishments of a culture, you're giving knowledge and understanding. If you choose to be uninformed, it's on you. But I think that these kinds of months, now you have Hispanic Heritage Month, you have Asian Heritage Month, you have Native American Heritage Month. So if whites are upset because there's no White Heritage Month, we are indoctrinated in that culture. We know the heritage, but it's things that whites don't know about us.
Beautifully
Does that
said.
answer your question?
Absolutely answers the question. Beautifully said. And I'll probably refer people back to this video if that ever comes up again, and I'll give them the timestamp that they can go and look that up. Now, this is something quite interesting, actually, and we're going to just stay with that for a moment. I know when we previously spoke, you talked about, and I was like, whoa, you talked about some of the textbooks, and you had a particular phrase about the Negroes and about the Indians. Can you tell us what that was? Now, you know, you talked about what it said in your school books, in your textbooks, but you had a teacher who told you what it said, but also told you the truth. I'd love to hear you share a bit more about that.
Well, again, I referenced my city of birth and my 25 years of living there. It was the seat of racism. It was the capital of the Confederacy. I mean, the Civil War ended, but the attitude still prevailed, and there was separate and unequal treatment. And I was raised in a segregated community. There were certain kinds of barriers that separated communities, if you will, railroad tracks or bridges, or too much of a distance to travel to unless you're a domestic worker. And the textbooks were inherently racist. They were written to, I think, indoctrinate white kids and to make us feel inferior. And so one of the textbooks said, Virginia history textbooks said, that the slaves were very childlike and they were happy, they danced a lot. And that the Virginia Indians were savages and they killed white people. Well, if you know, the first permanent English colony was established in Jamestown in 1607. And the settlers who went there, it was a business experience, really. You know, I don't know if you know about the British history and the founding of Jamestown. Well, there were Indians there. There were Native Americans there on that land, as Native Americans are on lands throughout the country and lands that were taken away from them. And they basically, there's so much in my head. I'm trying to be as clear as possible. In the 1930s, there was a man who practiced eugenics, who was the head of the state health department. And he reclassified all of the Virginia Indians as Black because some of them were lighter hued, and he didn't want the possibility of a mongrel race. This is all online. And so you had mistreatment of Virginia Indians, and you had basically, they didn't have any proof that they were Virginia Indians other than that they knew it. And so there was discrimination against the Virginia Indians. When the settlers came here, they would not comply with some of the things that they didn't want to be enslaved, basically. And so there were stereotypes about them. You come over, you take their land, they do the best to protect themselves. You want to imprison them. You can't imprison them because they have been independent. They are resilient. So you bring some slaves over in 1619, some Blacks. Anybody can ask me any questions. Let me just ask you, am I being articulate enough? Am I being clear enough? Because, you know, I have a lot in my head. This is a lot of years, you know?
No,
So,
absolutely. It's definitely clear enough. And we have got a couple of questions. So Zora, coming to you, I can see you've unmuted. Go for it. You had a couple of questions.
Yeah, I'll have to remind myself what I asked.
well, I see. Does Patricia feel as if society has changed in their attitudes towards Black people in the US?
Yeah, that was one of my questions.
Well, you know, it's all on a person by person basis or institution by institution basis. I mean, I've worked and work in white spaces. I come from I come from a space of love, is the best way to put it, but I am true to my authentic self. So I had a situation, I'll give you a case example. I mentioned I moved to central Pennsylvania because I'm married and he's white and I'm African-American, of course. And I did what I wanted to do. I wanted to build some bridges across differences. So I used my model of bridge building. And I went to a meeting that I was invited to. A friend of mine, female, white, invited me. And I go to all spaces here, and I may be the only Black person in there, but again, I say race is a social construct, so I don't let that be a barrier. Well, I sat down and the woman sitting next to me asked me if I was lost. And I said, no, Baba invited me. But I recognized why she said that. And then as I got involved in the organization, I saw further that they were not accustomed to diversity. But I wanted to stay with this group because of the value of what it was offering me. I enjoyed it. It was a reprieve from work. And so I also have a PR background. I have a PR agency. And I saw that this organization had a need for PR because they had good stories to tell about the things they were doing in the community. And I offered to pitch a story to one of the publications here, to which the then president said, don't write anything without my seeing it first. I said, well, in PR, we never send anything out to media without our clients first reading it to make sure we got information factual. So then there was a situation where one of the members actually said some horrible things about me that impeded our ability to have zoning here for our property that we wanted to have events at. And I didn't go low, as they say. I just kept it moving and I continued to go to the meeting. Subsequently, she stopped coming. Now, the proof of the plan is that it works. Now I am doing all of the PR for the organization. I have a very high percentage rate on getting press for them. Everything has transformed. Now, I feel that once you're in, you all may have been in spaces where you're the minority. So you're really history making, if you will, just by being in the space. I was director of PR at a white college in Pittsburgh. I was the first Black director of a PR for a white college in Western Pennsylvania. There had never been because Western Pennsylvania, again, that's not Philadelphia, that's in the mountains, that's in predominantly white spaces. So I have been in spaces where I was the only one, but I'm good at what I do. But when I first enter the space, there can always be a level of hesitance. I have never had a situation where there was not some kind of outright or hidden bias. And some, like getting back to the mind bugs, sometimes people don't even know they have it.
Right. So before you go on,
did I answer that question through the example?
In a way, I think you referred to your own experience rather than the much more wider Black experience, which it was just really what your feelings or thoughts were.
Right. Well,
in
in
terms of your
summary,
observations.
I'm not quite, I think everything is a case by case, if you will. And some of us may not be comfortable even entering those kinds of situations where, but you can see it even if you shop. There are things you can see. So I think a lot of what happens that represents discrimination, I don't always think people are aware that they are discriminating, or that they have the biases that they have, because it's such a learned behavior and is sometimes very unconscious. I feel if you don't talk about it, I think the key thing is to, with diplomacy, say what you are feeling by the interaction and opening up the door for discussions.
Right. I'm not going to monopolize this evening, but I just wanted one other question, if I may. Marilyn, can I just ask another question?
Oh, yes, of course you can.
Patricia, you talked about bridge building, especially when you're in white spaces. What does that actually look like? What are you referring to exactly?
Well, I have a multicultural mix of friends. I have mostly African-American friends, of course, not of course, because not everybody I would say would be in that category, but I do, because coming from the South and in Richmond, I just have an affinity for, I have an affinity for my people. I just do. It's a shared history. But because I have been in the mix with whites, really, I can tell the story about childhood if you want me to, with the reading the book, Marilyn. But I go into spaces like I belong there, and I am very much engaged. I don't just sit and I'm engaged. I want to know, I want to get to know people. So I hope I'm answering your question. It's not difficult for me. I'm here, I'm in central Pennsylvania. I'm less than 1% of the population, and I'm on boards and I'm doing things. I'm now having what I call When Sisters Gather. I'm bringing Black women here. We're staying at a Black B&B, but the surrounding area is white businesses. I teamed up with white businesses, letting them know I was bringing these Black women here with disposable dollars, and I was giving them a unique Gettysburg experience, because I have found that they are asking, how are they treating you here? So because they're asking, how are they treating me, because of what the geographical scape is, what I am proving to these women is that people are people and relationships matter. And sometimes what you think will happen to you will not happen, because someone has come before you and done some bridge building.
Right. Interesting. I don't know, and I may well be speaking out of turn, but as a Black woman in the UK, I go about my business. I don't see myself occupying white, Black, mixed race spaces. I'm just going about my business. And I never categorize where I am using those parameters, because I don't see that there is any area that I shouldn't venture into, or that is predominantly of a culture that should make me feel uncomfortable. Maybe it's because I don't think the distinction in England, it's much more covert, the racism. We don't have it staring in our face. You know, even if we did enter white spaces, I don't think anyone would have the gall to say, you don't have the right here. Because in terms of equity and parity, it's much more subtle for people of colour here. Would you agree, anybody?
Absolutely. That's why I said to Marilyn, I didn't want to offend anyone. I didn't want anyone to be, it's my story. You weren't a product of a slave system in the United States. Exactly. Those narratives, I said we are oral tradition culture. Those narratives are passed down. I mean, as a child, you learn what happened. Somebody may have been lynched. I'm saying that's terrifying for a child. but it does help you to know your boundaries. Let me just share something with you, if you don't mind, about the experience, my experience of actually having a relationship with a little white girl when we were both 4 years old, if you like. Yes?
Yeah, it may well be that Clive's got his hand up. Clive, you're muted.
Okay.
Before.
Yeah, I can talk. I can still share the story because that was the beginning
No.
of my
My question can wait. So do answer the question.
I just thought it might tie in with her story.
Yeah, it was my beginning of this building bridges, not walls thing. So my mother was a domestic worker, and she, she'd take me if she didn't have a babysitter to white homes with her. And there was one home that had a little girl. Her name was Catherine. She was my age. And I was always excited to go there because they gave me her hand-me-downs, and particularly her books. She gave me her books. She gave me her phonograph records. I saw these books. I saw a world behind children's books, but, white kids and nice picket fence neighborhoods and dogs and all of that kind of fun looking stuff in the books. So when my mother would take me, I was so happy because I knew I would read some new books, because Catherine's mother replaced the books she gave me. I had the old books and Catherine had the new books. If my mother hadn't taken them, they would have been discarded. So at any rate, we would sit side by side, and Catherine would read a page and I would read a page. Invariably, Catherine would stumble over her pages. Catherine didn't read as well as I did. And her mother was a little bit perturbed. Mother would watch, and my mother told me one day on the bus coming home that Catherine's mother was concerned and asked, why did I read better than Catherine? Now, you want me to speak it in my childlike way, what I said? I said, well, Mama, they gave me the books, and Catherine has new books. I have the old books they gave me, and I've read them over and over again. So why wouldn't I read better than Catherine? Catherine has everything. I just have these old books that I love. And my mother just said, Patricia, you're something. But why wouldn't I read better? I was more invested in it than she. And that's the tale of many Black folks. When we strive for excellence here, we are invested in our excellence because we know we're going to make our parents proud. We're going to make the whole neighborhood proud. Everybody celebrated every success I ever had, and they still do if they're alive. Even the ones in my age group, we celebrate each other. We honor our achievements. Does that help? It's a system where it denied you, and it also said that you were stupid. It said all kinds of derogatory things about you. And so in modern days, you see subtle kinds of things, but as I mentioned, I live in a conservative area. So I see Confederate flags, I see American flags, I see Trump flags. It doesn't bother me. It's the culture of some members of the community, but I know what the message is.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Clive?
I see Rudy's on. Rudy, can you tell them what we do together? Rudy's probably multitasking.
I'm here.
Okay.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much, Patricia. Great listening to you. And what you're really talking about is the context, and there is absolutely a context in terms of where you've been brought up, the time and space, and of course we have our journey as well. But in answer to your point, I think the work that we've done together over the years, going back 10 years or so, over 10 years, 12, 14 years, actually, probably, it's been very much about that culture, the insight, the spiritual side, and what that means to our people. And when I say our people, I'm talking about people of African descent, which we both spent a lot of time involved with and understanding. That's both from African right through to the Caribbean journey, those in the Caribbean and those here. Obviously, I'm heavily involved with the Windrush generations movement. and then of course the African Americans in America, and of course the Caribbeans who are in America as well. And so about understanding that relationship and sharing info on health. We've done a lot of health, spirituality, and surveys for the good of our community. So a lot of knowledge sharing, prostate health, which again, you know, 10, 12 years ago, very few people focusing on prostate health and what it actually meant to men of African descent in terms of their journey and what it meant to them physically, their manhood, things like that. There's a lot more of that these days, and of course there are people doing that these days who feel that they're the first, but you know, 10 years ago plus we were doing all of that. So our work together is enduring. I'm glad it's still out there as well. But not only that, we did the creative side as well. As you touched on, our community, people of African descent, they're the most creative people on the planet. They may not always get the credit, we know. And some great work from, I can't remember the woman's name who did all that very creative work as it related to the newspapers. She did something, she was a cultural artist. I just remember newspapers being part of the process. I can't remember what she did with them though. I can't remember her name now, but she was very creative. I don't know if you can remember her.
In what city, what context?
I can't remember. There was something she did was really creative. So she made something. I just know.
Oh, Tina, the quilts.
Quilts, that's it.
Yeah, the story quilts. Yes,
Yeah.
Pittsburgh. Yes, yeah. And we have on my website, we have her interview.
Yeah, yeah,
yeah. Rudy and I did. Rudy is a very creative mind, and I was charged with interviewing Black folks here to get their stories and supportive knowledge sharing, and they are on my Patricia Green group website. So I thank him for that. I just want to mention too that I met Rudy. This kind of goes back to your question about being in the spaces. So I met Rudy as a part of Jamestown 2007. Does anybody on the line know what that, when I say Jamestown 2007, with the exception of Rudy, do you know what that means?
I don't, and not Zora's shaking her head, so I don't think so.
Well, the British founded the quote New World, right? That was already present, of course, but they celebrated Jamestown 2007 to recognize the 400th anniversary of the founding of the New World at Jamestown, Virginia. Again, I told you about Jamestown earlier with the Virginia Indians. And I was working as a consultant to a multicultural tourism magazine. So I was the presence, the Black presence at these meetings. And again, I went in the room and no one was in the room but me in terms of my culture. And there was a man in the room who was the chair of the British Committee for Jamestown 2007, Alex King from Kent, England. And they had the distinction of Pocahontas dying in Kent, and they had a little statue for her in the town square area. So he came to me after the meeting to ask me who I was, basically why you're here. And I told him that I was with Multicultural Tourism Magazine, and we tell the story of stories of interest to people visiting Virginia, particularly the African-American imprint. And so he asked me, so what contribution did African-Americans make to Virginia? I said, we were slaves, we built it. Don't you know that? Your people brought us over here. So he laughed. See, that, I hope that, do you think that was an offensive thing to say or a direct thing to say? Being that he was British, you know, anybody think I offended him?
I think he was the offensive one personally, but that's
what contributions.
That's the point.
We became friends. We actually found common ground. And I had a friend in England, in Kent, who was Caribbean, and she was saying, you know, this is very impressive that you're his friend because, you know, he's a member of the Conservative Party. But that doesn't matter to me. George Bush gave me an award for this bridge building I was doing with the trade missions there. I think you can find common ground on key issues. So the bottom line is, every time I came to London, because I was bringing African-American trade business people to London, that's how I met or heard of the work you're doing. And the last time I saw him, it was so funny. Like, I don't even know where I went, but I caught the tubes. I don't know where I went, but I ended up where he wanted to meet me. It was obviously some kind of gentleman's club, because I went in and they knew who I was when I got there, of course, right? So he said, "There's a Black woman coming." So this guy directed me to the table. And I sat at the table, and he and I really became good friends. Seriously, I love him. But he said, "Patricia, you're the only person I know who probably shouldn't be in the room, but will always be in the room." I said, "Well, you're Sir Alex King," because some people called him Sir. "And if you invite me in the room,
Okay.
Yeah, Rudy's here.
Okay. Oh, I think probably. Okay.
Okay.
So
where
were we?
myself.
I've been reading the questions while we were waiting. Let me just respond, if you like, to the questions. Does the term Negro sound dated by today's standards? Again, I don't know. I'm 73 in December, so I'm now, what do we say? What's the term? Well, I say I'm not old, but the point is, everybody ahead of me is either in their 80s or not here. I don't have any relatives older than I am, but two cousins. Everybody else is younger than I am. We don't use that term. I don't remember even my parents using that term. We defined that we were Black, and we defined that we were African Americans. Whites defined that we were Negro, and sometimes they put Negro. Sometimes the nigger word kind of rolled out when they were saying that. So I don't know anyone who uses that terminology now. The other question, did I say I saw racism through my own family? What was my context of saying that? Does anyone remember?
Clive, that was your question.
It was one of your early observation when you were talking about your experience of racism. You made reference to seeing racism to your own family, and I wasn't quite sure.
Well, it must have been. So, oh, yes. Well, Marilyn, we touched on that last week. My father was in World War II. And when he came back, he served in Saipan. He was a member of the Army Corps of Engineers. And they were the Black troops who built the runways and the bridges in the barracks, in advance of the artillery, the white artillery. So he came home, and the store, a major department store, was offering a free white shirt to all who could show their honorary discharge papers. And he went to the store, and they told him there were no more shirts. So he hid behind something, and he saw all the white men get shirts. Then there was another time he was on the trolley car, and he had on his uniform. He got on, and it was crowded, and he could not get behind the line because, segregation. Blacks had to either leave the transportation vehicle or find some way to not be on the side of the line that the whites were on. And the trolley car driver stopped and said, "Get off, get on the other side, or I'm going to call the police." And he said, "But there is no room." He said, "I'm going to call the police." So he had his uniform on, he got off the trolley, and he walked home, and it was a distance.
Indeed. I did have another question for you, Joe, which is on in my experience, we talk about conscious and unconscious bias here, and sometimes difficult to know whether, when people say they don't know, whether in fact it really is because they don't know, or whether or not people will say, well, I wasn't aware of this, because we now talk about unconscious bias. Unconscious bias is real. We have it, I mean, so it's not an issue. So I just wondered whether or not to what extent you think that there is real, sometimes we call it everyday racism, going on compared to really those innocent things that if somebody is unconscious, to me, the person is essentially innocent. They're not sure what it is that they're doing. To what extent are we dealing with real everyday racism, sometimes sort of shrouded as unconscious bias?
Well, I listen to words because, you know, you can have certain nonverbal cues, but if someone makes a direct statement that is just like, for instance, when the woman said, "Are you in the right place?" And I knew that that woman had a racist thought about me because she didn't feel I belonged there. But there are people, I mentioned mind bugs earlier, who, because of learned behavior, things they've been taught, and they don't know any better, or social isolation because there are not many African Americans or other ethnic groups of color living in a particular community. A friend of mine who is in the travel tourism space told me of a situation with the wait staff at a hotel who were asking, why do these Asians have to ask for hot water all the time? Well, these were Asians who had their kids at a local college, and they asked for hot water because they drink tea. Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But it was like an inconvenience because they were not familiar with a large population of Asians living here where that was what was being asked. It was new for them, but it was an inconvenience without knowing. So sometimes it takes, again, building those bridges I get back to, and helping people to understand what they don't understand, giving them knowledge without getting angry, because that's key, because anger kind of breaks down the communication on both sides. You don't find the common ground when both parties are upset. So, I mean, I've had to negotiate, and sometimes I've had to take a pause before I dealt with a situation where I knew there was a level of bias, but I didn't know if it was intentional or not.
It's interesting though, because you say that, because one of the other issues, and I was just talking to somebody about this the other day, and I'm sure it probably is no different in America. Some of the ways in which racism operates might appear to the uninitiated that you're being presented with a compliment. So you'll have people say to you, "But you're not like the rest, are you?"
Yeah.
You know, and you might think, actually, oh, aren't they elevating me? They're really making me somebody who's important. But actually, what is happening is that person is really undermining who you are.
Right.
To what extent do you find that?
That happens because I write for a living. And, you know, stereotype is Black people can't write. And then I've heard you speak well. Well, I speak English. You know, in other words, there are linguistic variations within every culture. So why am I being singled out? So when I am presented with a compliment, I say, you know, I thank you for that, but there are so many others that I know or who are just like this or better. I mean, I said, part of it is just getting to know people and finding those things out. You know, and that's why I'm doing When Sisters Gather, because I'm telling you, I've done two of them, one in August and one in September, and I'm going to do 4 next year. And I'm going to branch out to another location nearby, another community. These businesses are thrilled. These women, there's a place, a winery in Gettysburg that makes the best wine sorbet. These women are not only loving the wine sorbet, but they're taking bottles of wine out the business. There's a woman who has a very nice, unique store with all kinds of interesting things. They just stayed in the store. There was so much they wanted to purchase. In other words, who spends the money in the family? Who handles the business? Black women are handling the business in terms of commerce. And I knew that they were the perfect target audience. I knew they would take the message back that Gettysburg is welcoming, and that the Gettysburg businesses, the buzz is out there about these women. As a matter of fact, I'm now on the marketing committee for Destination Gettysburg, the tourism arm of Gettysburg, because the color is green. You have to get past all that other stuff. And so you put people in a situational, you put people in the situation where they have to get to know each other, even if it's commerce related. Because sometimes if you go into some businesses and they don't treat you right, you don't want to return. And that is very prevalent here. We are very uncomfortable when we're followed around the store. So the stores I selected were stores where that had not happened to me, because I didn't want them to have a bad experience if I want to keep them coming back. Any responses to what I just said?
And Rudy wants to come in, I think.
Sorry?
Rudy wants to come in.
Okay.
I'm on mute. All right, I'm not on mute now. Good, thank you. Right, in the sense, as I was saying just before the break, Patricia, the point was institutionally now, talking from an institutional point of view and the people that may inhabit them. And I was saying, which you touched on, common ground. And the point being is what we say is the values of respect and inclusion are the common ground for all, regardless of background or status. So with that in mind, you're able to move around and work with people to improve the outcomes, whatever they may be. It's never perfect. And I'm making that point because, and you touched on it there, within these institutions and the progression that's been made. So I never want to be on, I would never want people to think that our community, wherever we are, that is people of African descent, whichever term they want to give them, whichever society, that they don't make progress, but because they do at all levels. So in all levels of this society here, you'll find people from the community, just like from our community, African and Caribbean people of descent, just like in the US, despite the challenges that overall discrimination, prejudice, and humiliation, we understand that. But I don't want people to think that we never progress, we never make progress within the context of the societies that we're in.
And I want to honor, and this kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier. And I'm just going to make this statement. I want to honor the Blacks who work in institutions every day in the corporate sector, in spaces where, you know, the highest levels of white institutions. I just want to honor them for being in those spaces, because I know I've been in some seminars. Everything isn't rosy, but they have found a way to navigate.
Yeah, and that's an important point, because one of the challenges, and I know because of the nature of the work that I've done at the senior level, is that we also participate in some of the culture that exists at times as well, in terms of a lack of collaboration, trust, cooperation within ourselves. And that is because that's if we buy into, and you made a great point with somebody saying, and leading on what Clive was saying as well, with somebody saying, oh, you're great, there's, you know, well done, you know, kind of thing. And if you take that on board, the term that's used institutionally, going along to get along. And that's definitely something we learned from people working in senior levels in the US, in terms of how you tackle that within our own community as well. So some of what you're saying is related to that.
And thank you for sharing that. You made me think of something else. We're not a monolithic culture.
Exactly.
We know we're not monolithic. And the power of persuasion that comes forth through media is tremendous. And now that there are so many different forms of media, 24/7 media, 365 days in a year, you're bombarded with points of view that frame your reference, how you feel and think about people. I met Marilyn when I was publicist to Donda West. And, sadly, and she died. I mean, she and I had known each other since college. And there is so much, as you know, in the news, celebrities are not thought leaders, they are celebrities. But people will put a celebrity on a status, but then in many ways, I think will manipulate the situation in a way that builds a lot of discord within the culture, within African-American communities. And that's something that I'm concerned about, how we can be manipulated in a way that hurts us. We don't have to have all Black friends. We don't have to do that, but there are some common kinds of history. We have to protect each other. So I can't get mad at a celebrity that is being manipulated in some way, because there is a story behind it that relates to divisive tactics that are used against us.
Well made point, Patricia. Let me come back to something you said earlier on, and some of the things that have just been said recently. You made a point earlier on, which I agree with, which is racism is a social construct. However, to me, at that level, it is probably too simplistic to see it just as that. And I say that because actually what we've got is this has become embedded, and contrary to what Tony Sewell in a report regarding racism recently, that says systemic racism doesn't exist. I think racism has become systemic. It becomes part of the establishment, it's institutionalized. And as such, when you say it's a social construct, whilst that's true, it might give the impression that it's going to be easier to resolve that. But when you've got something that's become systemic, social construct or not, actually there are some challenges, and that challenges relate to things like the fact that we ourselves support the maintenance of that that establishment, that systemic position. In some of the things that Rudy has just said there, we don't, in the way we relate to each other, we kind of, you see this with the potential things like black on black violence, because actually we are not identifying the real enemy, and we end up actually, rather than collaborating, we are fighting against ourselves. And I also come back to the point where I think that I have a friend who says that turkeys don't vote for Christmas, and the implication there is that not all of the white allies that we might see are white allies, because they are sometimes just there to get a free ride to elevate themselves. I referenced that to the white woman who joined the NAC, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, and pretend that she was black because she was going to progress. So I think there are some real challenges here, and I just have what your thoughts are about those things.
Well, I say some people just want to co-opt our culture. I mean, people wearing locks and people saying I'm black when their parents are saying, no, you're white, we're white. And so it's craziness that's happening. I think that, this is where, to me, Nikki Giovanni had a poem, but I can't remember it now. But there is so much that we should be proud of culturally. First of all, for surviving the atrocities against us. And I don't care what part of the world, if you're Black, there were atrocities presented against you. And you look at how our culture gets hijacked by people for profit. I always say, they make us hate ourselves, and then they make money off of our self-hatred, which is vicious, Now, you mentioned Black on Black crime. You know, these systems that are set up to keep people marginalized, I don't know what it's like in England, but you have poverty in America. You have lack of grocery stores. You have urban deserts. You have terrible conditions under which Black people live. You have lack of trust in healthcare systems because of systematic racism against Black people being used as guinea pigs. Still happens. So you don't want to take the COVID vaccine. You don't want to take the flu vaccine, but you are predisposed by your lived experience to have conditions that weaken your immune system. And so it is important. Now, let me just say, this is where Rudy and I collaborated too, because of the work I was doing with the CDC around flu vaccines. It was a contract my employer got. I'm just going to announce I had never been vaccinated against the flu because I was afraid of what they were going to put in my arm. Now, I have degrees, right? I'm supposed to think differently, but you have mistrust. However, when I started working in that campaign, I definitely got vaccinated because I was not going to try to convince Black folks to get vaccinated against the flu if I did not. And I'm glad I did. So COVID comes around, and I'm living in a space where I don't see Black folks in large numbers. So I'm trying to figure out what's the closest place I can go to get my COVID shot that's outside of the area. And I said, I'm going to go back to Montgomery County. I'm going to go to Maryland. I'm going to go where I moved from. And I talked with a friend who's a nurse, and she's white, and I expressed my concern because she was working at a hospital on COVID vaccines. And she said, she was very nice. She said, Patricia, I got vaccinated there. You know I care for you. You come, I will take you to the person. I will stand there with you so that you, it sounds crazy, right? But it's trauma. It's a lived experience of trauma that somebody's going to stick something in me and kill me. And so I'm boosted. I'm all boosted up. But these are the kinds of things when I'm working in groups, working in communities, building bridges, building influencers who will motivate Black folks to get vaccinated. These are the kinds of things that we talk about and talk through so that, and I know Rudy probably has similar experiences. So you have people who don't get protections and they get sick and they die. And then you have things that happen, like I said, on Black maternal health, which happens across. Serena Williams had an issue.
Yeah.
She almost died. So there you go. So, sorry.
I was going to say, we had major campaigns relating to what we call trusted messengers.
Yeah.
Just for that reason, our scientists, our immunologists, the GPs, the faith leaders from the community who could provide what we termed was inform the community, provide them with the assurance with the facts, and then they make their choice. And again, we're back to that sharing of learning and ensuring that we, in terms of countering the misinformation,
right,
we have our own professionals and experts who can get our community to understand what they need to do.
And you mentioned Black on Black crime. And I told you about the lived experience in many of these Black communities and the proliferation of guns, no gun laws. All of this to me is by design. Yeah, conflict comes up. You're already in a lived experience of trauma. Things happen. And it doesn't make it right. And then you end up in prison or dead the rest of your life. And then you're not going to go across the road or across another area and kill a white person. That would be suicide, right? So we don't, whatever we're dealing with, the people who are going to be impacted are probably people who are looking like us in most cases.
And I think that's indicative of the challenge that we face, because actually these things, somebody said that, and sometimes some of our people say slavery ended a long time ago. But as Marcus Garvey made a point, we must emancipate ourselves from mental slavery. And actually, we have some very educated slaves in our community now, never mind the uneducated ones. However, I know
I like that. Educated slaves. I like that. True.
I think Zora had her hand up earlier on. So
I've almost forgotten what I was going to ask, actually. Oh dear. I think it was more to do with, in your view, do we as Black people spend most of our time reacting to how we are perceived rather than being able to be proactive and act in our own space naturally? It just seemed as if some of the conversation is all about our whole lives are spent in reacting to what other races feel that we ought to conform to, rather than just getting on with the process of being.
Well, I always go back to the concept of the village. And sometimes people don't have a village. You mentioned the educated slaves. That's vested interest motivated, not collective interest motivated.
Yeah.
And I don't want to, I do know reactionary behavior. I recognize that I have exhibited it, but I just think that if there are ways, you can't change everything, but you can change one part of it, if you will. And the young people are where I start, the children who will inherit. And part of When Sisters Gather is that it's intergenerational. And the youngest one at the one we had last month was 10, and the oldest one was 80. And the young one and two other young ones, a 15-year-old and a 20-year-old, actually facilitated a discussion on being your authentic self in spaces where you're the minority. And the future is in great hands, and a lot of that is the way the parents parent. So you got to teach parents how to parent, and you have to be a mentor to young minds.
Good point. There's an old saying, isn't there? Every generation has a mission to perform. But also what we're touching on, there's a term we use, Black may tell someone how you look, but it does not describe who you are or your identity.
Yeah.
So it really does depend on yourself, that journey that you've taken. You can have humble origins or come from humble origins, or you could come from, you know, both parents there, the greatest support there ever could be. So I think somehow we have everybody in that human mix. But of course, the pressure in the societies that we kind of live in try to turn it all upside down and say it's, you know, it's not great.
To asking if you believe that you can be your authentic self if you are in an interracial relationship.
Is that a question for me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, I heard part of it, but can I be my authentic self?
Yeah. Do you think that that level of maintenance?
Well, no, I have no. How do I put this? Do you think that I'm authentic in my relationship or not?
With your partner who's not of your
race?
Yes. I've only just met you, so I have no idea.
I know. Well, sometimes we can pick up signs. So the bottom line is this. I was true to my authentic self when he met me on the dating site. It was one for senior citizens. And he said to me, he reached out and he said to me, "You're pretty and you write well." He said, I had my own business and I'm retired and I had to travel a lot for my business and I don't want to travel anymore like I was. Then he said, "My wife just died." So I responded, I don't date men whose wives have just died. Oh, he said he was an introvert too. I said, I'm an extrovert and I wouldn't date me if I were an introvert. And I said, I like to travel. So you sound like a nice person, but good luck on your search. So I put it out there, and then he responded, I don't want a life anything like the one I had. I said, whoa. So I met with him and we started dating and I married him. He knew who I was just by the way I responded, because I was authentically me. And we have learned from each other, because he is an engineer. Engineers are very engineer. So he said they do rocks and concrete, not people, right? And so the bottom line is that I have enhanced his life and he has enhanced mine, because I know he loves me. I mean, sometimes you can say you're not easy to love if you have a voice, but he loves me and I love him. And we have had challenges because he married me. That's real when you're in this community. No overt challenges, but covert challenges. But, he would get upset and I said, it's okay. I said, in PR, we know every method we can use to sway public opinion, but I'm just going to sit on this. I'm just going to keep building my bridges. I don't need to be the voice for change for what is happening for us or to us. People need to say they are not who you think they are, who look like them. Does that answer your question? I always give a little bit more. So the thing is, I have not changed anything about me. I have not had to sacrifice anything. If anything, I protect him, because if he gets upset, I say, you need to just be still. Don't get upset about this. This is lived experience for me. And at this age in my life, I don't have anything to prove. This is who I am. I know the journey. I know I'm inclusive. I know I don't do stereotypes about people. So let's just let the actions speak for themselves, that we are going to be in the light. I'm fine, because I live on a beautiful farm and it has taken a lot of pressure off me, from a high blood pressure and all that stuff. I'm in my chi. I mean, I could not have dreamt this serenity that I have never had in my life.
Could you not have achieved that on your own? Could you not have achieved that on your own?
Not living in central Pennsylvania on a farm, and that's, that has a historic presence to it too, Civil War building. But it's not the farm, it's the serenity. I lived in the city because I needed to work in an urban area. I needed to work where I had access to populations that are prevalent in terms of hiring me, as well as my service to them, in terms of the workplace, in terms of the customers, the clients that I represented. So no, I could not have had what I have here, because I wouldn't have been searching for it. So sometimes you don't know what where life was bringing you all along, because I could appreciate it. Some of my friends said, how can you live there? It's like all of these things, all the demographics. I'm fine. I know what my story was before this. I was successful, I still am. But I probably was taking some years off of my life because of the stressors that were present in the environment where I lived. I had a mortgage on a house. I had 2 kids. One was still living with me. I had to have a car. I had to get on Metro every day and go to work and come home late. I'm chilling now. I have my own business here. Everything is fine. Well, Rudy, you met me when I was in a rat race, I think.
That's right.
Do I have any differences now?
Big difference. You float around in a serene-like manner now.
Yeah, I have my herbal garden. I have my pumpkins, gourds. I said, who am I? And that's what my friends say. You look like Patricia, but where is she? It's something that we all should have, basically, our calm, wherever we can have our calm. And the contentment in being who you are without apology, and being confident and competent in who you are. And I know all of that can be challenging for us. And so I spent a lot of time, because my story is not one. I told you my mother was a domestic worker. She cleaned homes. My father worked at the post office garage. If you want to stereotype me, that's not someone who's on a track for success, right? But that who they were, where they worked, had nothing to do with their values. And getting back to what you said, Clive, shame on those people who are walking around Black and not being concerned about the plight of Black folks in general. And you don't have to do it in a radical way. You just have to, sometimes, like I said, it's having a conversation with someone to know that they're not alone. That's why, again, when sisters gather, the conversations that come out of that, these women are building their own bridges with each other independent of me. I invite them. I might have said earlier, it's not an open come. I invite women who are intentional about wanting to support other women.
You touched on servant leadership there.
Yes.
In terms of that, you know, if having made your way in the world, that you are free and that you are willing to help those from where you originally came from rise up, or at least, if not do that, don't make it worse for them.
Absolutely. And that's what people tell me about myself. I mentioned that I had, this is kind of related to what we're saying. How did I come into this profession? Well, I had gotten my master's in social work with a concentration in community organization and social planning. And then I was hired to direct the urban studies program at the university that I graduated from undergrad, the historically Black college in Richmond. And the students were in their field placement class one day, and one of them was telling me about, you know, just these conditions. This was in the 1970s, the conditions that impact Black people in the poor communities in Richmond, and how sometimes you see triumphs. You see in the midst of these challenges, you see just triumphs over adversity. And then one of the students said, but these stories aren't told in the media. We don't read these kinds of stories in the media. We only see the negative side of Black life in the media. And then one of them said, so Patricia, how do we get the good stories out? And I said, I don't know. That's a good question. So I said, I need to find that answer. And so I did some research and I found this PR program, because I really wanted, I said, I have the community engagement background, so I know how to go into communities and mobilize people for self-determination and social change, but how do I get the media to talk about these good stories? And that's how I ended up getting the PR degree, because that student asked me that question. That sounds like a Forrest Gump moment, right? So that's what I'm doing now. And I integrate the two disciplines. So that's all to say. I guess I could have had another path. I could have worked in corporate, you know, I could have worked for an ad agency or PR agency, but I knew that I couldn't, from a mental health perspective, I knew that was not a place that I could be. And so I found my place, and I'm happy that I did.
Well, Patricia, that is fantastic. We are glad that you found your place. And as you said, that's how I met you. For those who, when Patricia mentioned Donda, this was the book that you were helping to promote, Raising Kanye. And that's how I first met you, in terms of being over here and helping Donda West do the promotion for what is still a fantastic book. As you said, unfortunately, she passed away.
I want to interject something, though. I want to do a shout out for Margot. So again, this whole bridge building thing. So I'm in London, and Yvonne Thompson was my key contact there. And she and I did some very good work together, my end, bringing the people there, her end, finding the right meetings with the right people with respect to contract opportunities. And Margot, who did Adornment London.
Are you talking about Margot Rodway?
Yes, Margot. Yeah. Yes, I met her through Yvonne. And when I saw Donda in a bookstore in Washington, and that's how we reconnected. And she was telling me she was going to be going over to London to do this Princess Di tribute concert with Kanye. And she was very upset with the low book sales in the store. It was a Black bookstore, and she was upset because the publishers had not taken an interest in Black bookstores. And she thought that was why the customers were so low in attendance. And so I told her I could talk with some friends in London about doing a book signing while she was there if she was interested, which she was. And Margot just took it on a plane that we could not have imagined, because Waterstones bought the books from Borders. And then she had all kinds of media interviews. Donda wanted to talk with some single parents. She had that opportunity to talk to some teen parents. And then you met her in her discussion that evening. But I could not have done any of that for Donda had I not done the trade missions to the UK, had I not been in the meetings for Jamestown 2007. All of that was connected to my meeting you, and it's being in the space and not being uncomfortable when you're the only one in the space. Because there's a goal that will benefit countless other people beyond you. And that's what I believe in.
Brilliant. So for those of you, now, first of all, I'm going to come to you first, Zora, because I know you've had several questions. I know your mind is always ticking over. So is there anything else you wanted to ask as we start to bring to this conversation? It has been a great conversation to a close. So Zora, anything else you wanted to ask or add? Or
oh, you've gone and sprung that on me now, because I was sitting here just enjoying the narrative and listening to everybody's views. You know, I think as a Black woman, I'm sorry if there's any background noise, I think our story is never ending. And I think we continue to evolve and cope with the any situation that we are faced with. I just wondered why you believe the success of Black men, our counterparts, hasn't been as great or as successful as it has for Black women.
Success? Now, how do you define success, Laura?
Well, in terms of the perception I know, you know, when I look around me and I look at the movers and shakers in, you know, in our culture, invariably they are women. In the corporate world that I've spent a lot of my career in, on the odd occasion when I have met another person of colour in the boardroom, it has been a woman. There have been very, very few occasions in my 40-year career so far that I've come across successful Black men in the corporate world. And I think there is, I don't have any data to back up what I'm saying, but I think it's a well-known fact that Black women, we seem to have more opportunities than our fellow men. So what are your thoughts in terms of perception? What do you
It's
think?
a little bit different here, Zora, because Black women
10 times in terms of size of the UK.
Yeah, it's a little bit different in terms of Black women having that presence. That's something that is relatively new in terms of corporate sectors. Black men, I can rattle off many names of Black men who were at American Express. I mean, years ago, at the advent of businesses by legislation, because businesses have to, if they want federal contracts, they have to adhere to performance goals with respect to hiring minorities. and there's money in federal contracts. So sometimes it's done for economic reasons, not for, say, social reasons that you bring in Blacks, but traditionally it was the Black men who were in those sectors more so than the Black women. I think that with respect to the growth of Black women in corporations and say even in institutions that are not corporate but are major organizations, I think that's a good thing. I think we bring a special kind of I think we bring to the workplace something that no one else can bring like we bring. First of all, we are open. I don't know, again, in your culture, I can only speak for here. We're very open, we're competent, and that's why we're there, but we are open about engagement. If you're in that sector, you have to engage. It can't be a silo. You have to engage. I think we're a lot more open than Black men are with our feelings, and they don't have to be negative feelings, engagement feelings, I'm saying. So, but again, over here, it's still more Black men in corporate.
Really, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
You're welcome.
Wonderful. Rudy, is there anything you wanted to say in closing?
I'd just like to say, great to see you, Patricia. Very well done.
Thank you.
And your spiritual perspectives are still very important. And I'm glad to see that you're still sharing them as well.
Yes.
And the values, of course.
Thank you. And we'll be doing some things together. Stay tuned.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Rudy. And also, Patricia, I often think that the USA, when I say ahead of us, I mean that they've gone through experiences in a much more direct, in-your-face way. So have had to then have sort of strategies and ways to cope with things, deal with things like the unconscious bias and all of those things. So as you look at sort of where we head from here, and in terms of maybe building those bridges, is there anything we in the UK can learn from the more direct struggle that you've had in the US, for example? What do you see? How do we move forwards in terms of, because I know people often say, stop looking back. And that's one of the reasons why they say we should stop telling these stories. But in terms of now moving forwards, taking these experiences, taking the things that we've learned, taking the things we've been through, where do you see us heading and how do we continue to enhance our own futures?
Well, I think it can start with just what you all are doing right now. You know, there are many other folks who could probably give you different perspectives. You might want to look at, Rudy and I looking at doing some things during Black History Month, but you might want to look at our Black History Month and talk with Rudy about how you can engage some more thought leaders who are Black. I think the more we begin to build bridges with you all, the more we can take the best of each of us and move forward. I am always excited to meet Blacks beyond country borders because it gives me a fresh opinion. So that's what I'd say. We can all mentor each other.
Yeah, yeah. We don't
Sorry,
need
Rudy,
to make,
go on.
as I say, yeah. My point adding to that is that we don't need to make false comparisons with anyone else, whether it's internalizing us as families of people or other people from different backgrounds.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I just think I applaud you for doing this and thank you for having me speak my truth. It's just my truth, so I don't say it's anyone else's truth.
Your journey.
Yes.
And Clive, I'm going to hand back to you in terms of, is there anything else you wanted to say, anything else you wanted to share? I will hand back to you.
Oh, sorry, let's oh, sorry, I thought I was muted, but I'm not. All I'd say, I mean, I think these conversations, I think Patricia is right. I think we do need to continue to talk about these things because actually, unless we talk about these things, people will believe that all is well and actually the work has been done. Slavery occurred hundreds of years ago and we're in a different world. I think these conversations emphasize the fact that actually we have a lot of work to do if any of us was ever of any other opinion. And Patricia, thank you very much for sharing your truth with us. I think hopefully, despite the disruption, it's been a civilized conversation, which is something that we or often call angry. This wasn't an angry conversation. We did have an angry intervention, but actually, I wanted to comment on something where you said that we don't have to shout on about certain things earlier on. And I'd forgotten I wanted to touch on this. I was talking to somebody else around this recently, and I was talking to somebody who was an angry woman, in this case, a angry Black woman. And she left an organization because she wasn't being heard. And actually, she left an organization I was involved in. And one of her feedback to me was that she thought I wasn't supportive. What I said to her was that actually, I was actually conveying the same message, but in a very different way. Now, you didn't see that, but actually I was doing that. But it made me think, though, and what I said to her is that actually there's still a role for the angry voice, but it can't be the only voice in the room, because actually it's not going to be heard. So having the combination of the angry voice, I think sometimes they have a term for that, isn't it? That you've got somebody who will be the stick on the carrot and the stick. So somebody carries the stick and somebody has the carrot, but the objective is the same, to make a difference.
Right. Hold that before Tamika Mallory's video. Would you share that with your group? I sent it to you.
Yeah, is it one that you sent via email?
Yes.
Yeah.
Tamika Mallory worked for Al Sharpton at one point, but she has an organization that addresses the way we're being treated. And she is a powerful young voice. She says it. When she shows up, she has the angry voice is the one that has the largest crowd of supporters, because she's speaking for Black folks and how the oppressive system denies Black folks. So it was at the height of the George Floyd killing, the aftermath of that she was on the street. It was extemporaneous speech, but they are putting on the internet, they're saying one of the best speeches of all times. And it came from here. It came totally from here. And then she spoke at the graduation this year at the college I graduated from. She was the keynote speaker, and she was just as powerful then. So the angry voice and the young angry voices, they got a lot of folks, they got a lot of tribe members, and they vote now too.
Indeed. So we do need to continue with these conversations, and through Black History Month, we are going to continue with having these conversations, and it may be, Patricia, you might want to join some of those conversations again. In fact, Rudy, with his background, might like to join us on Thursday when we're actually having a conversation around business and finance, because actually, in the particular climate that we're living in now, it really is important that we pay attention to the pennies and to the pounds will take care of themselves. So,
add
Marilyn,
me to the calendar, please, Marilyn. Can you add me to when you all are having your discussions?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
She can. So all I would say is thank you all for joining. I suspect that we will be putting this out at some point into the public domain. It would have been tonight, but after that intervention, it won't be tonight. It'll have to be after we've deleted some elements to this. So, but Marilyn, thank you as always for being a superb host. Thanks everyone else for being with us tonight, and thank you for joining us, Rudy. Until the next time, we're going to stop the recording now.